It's been nearly 20 years since Malcolm Gladwell changed forever the way we think about success. His 2008 nonfiction classic, Outliers, has been a staple of airport bookstores and book recommendation threads ever since. An easily digestible lens into the world of the hyper-successful and the circumstances that allowed them to get that way. The book talks about what made them so successful and what separates them from us mere mortals, as well as what steps we can take to hopefully try to bridge that gap. In this video, we're gonna be talking about Outliers and ultimately deciding whether it should be required reading. We're gonna be giving out awards, we're gonna be talking about my favorite, most iconic quotes from the book. We're gonna do a full breakdown in this video. Before we jump in, be sure to subscribe to this channel for more book videos, more book recommendations. Be sure to leave your comments below what you're reading, what you want me to sort of deep dive. But without further ado, let's jump right into this. Let's start with our first category. So I've talked about the best scene in a book, but obviously this is a nonfiction book. So let's talk about the big idea of Outliers. Now for this, there's really only one choice, one idea that has had such a lasting impact that in many ways it superseded the relevance of the book. That is the 10,000 hours rule. Now the 10,000 hour rule essentially provides that any master of their craft has done at least 10,000 hours of practiced work, to get that way, to reach that level of mastery. And in the book, Gladwell talks about specifically the Beatles, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, these masters of their individual crafts, of their individual industries, and how they put the hours in to become masters of those crafts. This 10,000 hours rule has since become sort of the way that we talk about any sort of practice. I know people who have never read this book, but they constantly bring up the idea of a 10,000 hours rule. It has transcended what the book is in many ways. And it is essentially the core crux, the main idea that was sort of pulled from this book. Now, the book itself is not saying that the 10,000 hour rule is the main idea, right? The main idea of this book is sort of to make you understand that success is a multifaceted thing. It doesn't happen in a vacuum. The people who we think pull themselves up by their bootstraps and come from nothing have unique opportunities and have the bravery and the wherewithal to take advantage of those opportunities. That's sort of the crux of what this book is about. But nobody talks about that. They talk about the 10,000 hour rule. That's sort of the most easily digestible rule to take away from this book, and it is what has allowed this book to enter popular culture into the way that it has. Now, I always begin these videos of talking about where I was when I first read this book. I think I was in high school, probably late high school when I read this book. It was sort of highly recommended at that time as like the go-to nonfiction book. It's probably one of the first nonfiction books that I read on my own independently and really dove into. I grew up reading, I've always been a big reader, but I was typically growing up with fiction. Outliers sort of was my entry point into the world of nonfiction, into the world of sort of these pop psychology, pop sociology books, these quote-unquote self-help books. It's not really a self-help book in any sort of meaningful way, but it is sort of in that vein. It's sort of an entry point into that genre. And I think it is a pretty good one even now. And obviously we'll go through the categories here, but I always want to talk about where I was when I first read this. Where were you when you first read Outliers, if you have read it? Are you thinking about reading it? Where are you within your life? So leave that comment below. I always like to hear where people are when they first experienced a book or first sort of heard about a book, because I think it speaks to the relationship we have with some of these books. Let's move on now to our best quote. And this is a standout line that kind of stuck with you. The quote that I'm going to go with here is a long one, so please indulge me here. The quote is that it is those who are successful, in other words, who are most likely to be given the kinds of special opportunities that lead to further success. It's the rich who get the biggest tax breaks, it's the best students who get the best teaching and most attention, and it's the biggest 9 and 10-year-olds who get the most coaching and practice. Success is a result of what sociologists like to call a cumulative advantage. End quote. Okay. Lots to unpack here, but that's essentially the hypothesis of this book, right? That this accumulative advantage manifests itself in different ways, and that the outliers, the people among us who are able to sort of excel and exceed at that next level, are really those who are able to leverage those advantages, leverage those accumulative advantages, and really turn that into something more, not just allow that to be one thing. So it's one thing to be born earlier in the year and have an advantage in sports, but it's another to have excessive practice time available to you because your father is the coach of a team, and therefore you have field time, field access, training services that you otherwise might not have, and take it to that next level and ultimately become what we would call an outlier as a result of this book. I think it's a great sort of snapshot of what the book is about, what the ultimate view of this book is outside of just the 10,000 hours rule and whatever that is. So I wanted to shout that out as we go through this book. Next up, let's talk about what has aged the best. Ironically, what I think has aged the best from this book is the idea of pop sociology and pop psychology books. Because there are now so many of these books filling up airport bookstores, filling up bookstores all over the country. We would never have Atomic Habits or any of those actually good Ryan Holiday books that are attempting to synthesize the works of Marcus Aurelius and of Stoicism into sort of easily tangible, easily digestible works, if not for Outliers. Outliers sets the standard of essentially using anecdotal evidence to prove a hypothesis, even if it's not necessarily scientifically backed. But it also proves that people sort of like experiencing big, complex ideas in that way. And that maybe this is the ideal pop way to get people to think about more complex ideas, is to have sort of these anecdotal pop culture kind of references to already successful, famous people. I don't know, there's a weird sort of relationship there, but definitely this idea of pop psychology, pop sociology books was not necessarily created by Gladwell, but I think blew up as a result of Outliers. And I've seen so many more people trying to capitalize on this sort of pseudo-intellectual text, smart guy books, big brain books, as a result of the Gladwell books and their success over the last 20 years. What has aged the worst then? This one to me, also easy. Vivek. Vivek is described in this book as a sort of genius person who figures out this flaw in the system by which his daughter's youth basketball team plays, and he has his girls' basketball team start pressing, running a full court press, and they are beating teams down by running this full court press the entire game. And they eventually win a championship, I think, as a result of using this press. And this guy Vivek is made to be this kind of genius as a result of this. And he's painted to be like this guy who thinks outside the box. He's painted to be an outlier, if you will. Now the problem with this is that Vivek went on to buy an NBA team, the Sacramento Kings. And if you tell them that their owner is a genius, they will think, did Vivek sell the team? Because I know that guy is certainly not a genius. If you say your owner Vivek is a genius, their heads may pop like a balloon, because the guy has been a terrible NBA owner, proven kind of a bozo in that arena. So obviously not everything's gonna be transferable. Your genius in one area might not be another. But even this whole idea that like this guy is pressing 12-year-old girls, like these girls are running a full court press and dominating because of that, I think it's just kind of annoying gameplay. Like, I think that's just, he's just being kind of a dunce and abusing the rules. Whatever. I mean, obviously the girls can break a press if they want to, but I do think it's kind of lame to give him so much credit in this book. And Vivek, his fall from grace as this great genius has definitely aged the worst since 2008. Okay, let's talk about our Dion Waiters heat check. For those who don't know, Dion Waiters is a basketball player who would very frequently think he was getting hot in basketball, chuck up a shot, and it would not go in. He would get a heat check shot, and a lot of times authors have those as well. And our boy Gladwell, whoo-wee, did he have a lot of heat checks. A lot of them came after this book, I will say, but he has one within here that I think is also quite problematic. And it's very simply this idea that he talks about crime in a book and how in the South there are less stranger crimes, and how in the South people are committing crimes like against people they know, whereas in the North it's more about like stranger randomness crimes. And there's this whole sentence about we'd like to think that we can escape our sort of ethnic roots. I don't know, Gladwell. Don't love this from you. Don't love this whole crime and punishment. It's sort of a touch and go situation, this chapter. I think it's aged terribly. I think this is the ultimate heat check from Gladwell, because the guy is cooking in certain parts of this book. You're talking about success. You're talking about what separates successful people. He talks about this whole thing with this guy with 195 IQ and how his life was kind of a failure, and what went wrong in this guy's life. All right, I see where you're going there. And then you get into this crime and punishment thing with the South and the North and people not knowing each other and ethnic backgrounds. Hate this. Hate this stereotyping, generalization, and Gladwell acknowledges that it could be problematic. He acknowledges that this could be taken for stereotyping. So he kind of gives himself an off-ramp here, but this was the ultimate heat check. My man was feeling himself. He left this one in the book. It's not a great, has not aged well, not a great part of the book to me. Let's talk next, Apex Mountain. This has got to be Malcolm Gladwell's Apex Mountain. I mean, the guy has never been more culturally relevant than Outliers. This makes him a household name. He is somebody who smart intellectuals, you know, they really regard after this book. He's getting Bill Simmons podcast invites. He's getting Grantland feature articles. He's a guy who people are like is super smart. You know, that's Gladwell. You know, he's the intellectual. He's getting speaking engagements. I'm sure he's making more money than God speaking to companies about Outliers and all this stuff. And I get it. The guy seems very intelligent. He's a great speaker. But I've also listened to his podcast and the Bill Simmons podcast for years, and I know enough that, he may have gone off the reservation a little bit as he gets a little bit older, as many of us do. But to me, it's pretty clear that nothing ever gets better for Gladwell than this book. This is his apex as a writer, apex as a sort of intellectual thinker. He could do whatever he wanted after this. He could write whatever he wanted. He was at the top of his game. Obviously, he has some additional books that kind of gained some heat after this. I think David and Goliath was probably his last big book after this one. He has a podcast people like as well that I think also kind of went off the rails. But, I don't want to bag on Gladwell. The guy did a lot of good work, and this is clearly his pinnacle as a creative in my mind. Let's talk now about best hang, worst hang. My best hang from this book, I gotta look here to make sure I'm getting the name right. Suren Ratwadi. So Suren Ratwadi, best hang, he is a veteran pilot who investigates and sort of chronicles airplane crashes. And Gladwell's talking to him about these airplane crashes, blah, 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 blah. But this guy just seems like a good hang. Just seems like somebody you'd want to get a drink with, because this guy has some experience. Veteran airline pilot, has documented crashes. He's got some stories. These are the kind of people I want to get a drink with, I want to hang with. So easily, Suren Ratwadi, if you want to hang out, airplane crash expert, veteran pilot, I'm game. I'm game to get a beer. Now, worst hang, by the same token, same flip side of the same coin. I'm going to go with Chris Langman, who is the guy I referenced before, this 195 IQ guy who kind of led this tragic life. He didn't get into college because of some paperwork, administrative error. And in the book, it kind of gets into this idea that, it just never worked out for this guy. He became sort of a household name. He got famous because he had this highest IQ ever on record. But more than that, my man's a loser. He became a conservative conspiracy theorist in the weirdest way possible. He's talking 9/11 conspiracies. He's talking literally everything. He's talking eugenics. Woof! Off the rails, this guy. Do not want to hang out with him. Disavow, disavow, disavow. Let's move on to unanswerable questions. Unanswerable questions, very simply, does Malcolm Gladwell believe his own BS? Because I think part of him knows that a lot of his books, not just Outliers, but a lot of it is anecdotal. The stories he's citing are anecdotal evidence. They're not scientifically backed, despite the way that he's packaging them to sort of appear. He is very often packaging the stories of his books to feel more scientific than they actually are. And I think he's cognizant of that. I think he's aware that it's not as straightforward, it's not as scientifically backed as maybe he would like to pretend it is. But by the same token, if you're as successful as Gladwell has been, if you've had the success he's had, if you've been speaking to corporate boardrooms for 20 years, at a certain point you're going to start believing your own hype. And I have to believe that part of Gladwell believes this stuff, believes that this is actually real, believes that the 10,000 hour rule actually matters. I think he might respond and say, I'm just asking the questions. It's not really my job to conclude on this. To which I'd say, yeah, that's kind of a cop-out, Malcolm. You're the rich guy, I get it, but it's kind of a cop-out. So I would love to know whether he actually earnestly believes what he's selling in these books, because at a certain point you are a salesman as a nonfiction storyteller, I think, and he's selling a good bit. He's selling a good bit, and I want to know whether he actually believes it now, almost 20 years later. So what is my ultimate conclusion? Is Outliers required reading? I'm going to say yes, and I'll tell you why. Because Outliers changes the way that we talk about successful people. It has become ubiquitous with the way in which people discuss success, discuss the pathway to success, and beyond that, beyond the outside discourse around the book. I think it's useful and that the core idea still holds strong, right? This core idea that people who become successful, there is more to it than just, bootstrapping themselves. There are circumstances that allow them to become successful. And what we can do to bridge that gap, to put ourselves in a position to be an outlier, is really to leverage the opportunities that we have and to be bold enough to take the opportunities to gain those 10,000 hours, to leverage our own relationships, our own opportunities to make ourselves a master of one field or another. So for those two reasons, both the actual stuff that's in the book, the lessons themselves, even the stuff that has not aged well, even the stuff that is not perfect, recognizing that no book that's almost 20 years old is going to be perfect in that post-context, cultural context, I do think it's worth and required reading because it is such a seminal text in the world of nonfiction. Understanding this book, understanding the format, understanding how it kind of is put together will give you a lens into what a lot of nonfiction storytelling looks like over the next 20 years. So many books are borrowing this style. So many books are trying to be outliers still every week, every month, every year. That if you realize where they're sort of pulling from, you'll start to recognize the good copies, the bad copies, and everything in between. For all those reasons, Outliers is required reading. Let me know what you think of Outliers. Be sure to subscribe to this channel for more of these videos. Leave a comment below letting us know what we should do a video on next, whether it's required reading or not. Until later, I will talk to you guys soon. Bye now.